What's up guys, in this video guide series I'm gonna explain you how a spring-powered bolt-action sniper rifle works from its super fundamentals. So it's physics, then how the parts work together and what's important and what's the things that you should take care of when you buy one or when you tech on one. Now the things that I'm going to show you and I'm going to teach you in the series is important because if you happen to own a cheap Chinese-made sniper rifle and there's something wrong with it, if you know how it works, you can fix it, and if you own a high quality one like the SSG-24, you don't have to tech on it, but still it's interesting to know how everything works together, what happens when you actually wreck the bolt and what affects the BB's trajectory. So let's get right into it. First of all, what is a bolt-action sniper rifle? A spring-powered one. It is a very easy system. It compresses air and blows the BB, which is the projectile right here, through the barrel, which is nothing different than doing this. The air pressure created to accelerate the BB through the barrel is made with this unit right here. So here we have the receiver, cylinder, and the trigger unit. In this video, I'm going to focus mostly on the cylinder. So that's where the air pressure gets created. And if you like this series, I'm going to continue it and I'm going to talk about, inner barrels, hop-up systems, trigger units, and all that kind of stuff. But for now, let's just focus on the cylinder. To show you what's inside, let's just disassemble it. If you can disassemble the SSG, you can disassemble most sniper rifles. The only difference is mostly materials. Design-wise, they are, as long as you don't use capillars, they are very, very similar. So we unscrew the nozzle. We take out the piston, spring guide falls out by cocking the cylinder all the way back, and then the glide ring also fell out, but we don't need to focus on this part for now. Let's just focus on the internals of the cylinder. Now to take out the cylinder, we have to remove the trigger unit by loosening those two screws here on the bottom. I don't recommend doing this, especially on the SSG-24, since those screws are secured with screw glue, and once you open them, the screw glue is gone, and then the screws might fall out by the vibrations of the shot. So unless you have screw glue at home, don't remove the trigger unit from the receiver. Okay, there we go. So here we have the cylinder. That's the base. That's where the air gets compressed. The reason why the slot is in there is so that the spring guide stopper can move up and down, and so that this piston inside can be catched by the pistons here. But more about that later. So what the piston basically does inside the cylinder, it is moving forward and the air cannot go anywhere except out towards the front since we have the seal cap, so the air cannot go backwards. It's moving forward and presses the air out. And in front of the cylinder goes the nozzle. The job of the nozzle is it's basically a die. It just shifts the air pressure into a small hole, presses it into a small hole, and it just blows the air through the inner barrel. If there wouldn't be a nozzle, it would look like this, and that wouldn't work. The air would just escape on the sides. So yeah, that's the part of the cylinder. That's the job of the cylinder, just building the base to compress the air. Then inside we also have the spring guide, which we need since, first of all we need a spring obviously because something has to accelerate the piston. And, if you compress a spring, it kind of looks like this, it wants to go in all kinds of weird directions. And therefore we need a spring guide to avoid this. So spring goes on the spring guide, then the piston goes also onto the spring. And now when we compress those, as you can see, the spring has to follow the axis of the spring guide, and that's why we need a spring guide. Now a lot of people don't understand what actually happens during the cocking process. They don't really know where the parts are going while you cock the rifle. So let's explain this real quick. Right now the parts of the rifle look like this inside the gun. I'm gonna separate now the cylinder from, just to visualize how that works. Just gonna separate the internals of the cylinder from the cylinder. Spring guide stopper goes in here. Okay, there we go. So now the parts are like this inside the rifle. Obviously the internals are inside the cylinder, and that's how it looks like. Now we cock the gun backwards. Oh, actually the gun was already cocked, so let's shoot it. Okay, let's cock it. So when I pull the cylinder back now, the piston compresses the spring onto the spring guide. So I move this back. Obviously those parts have to move backwards too. And you know, they could move with the entire cylinder if there wouldn't be the spring guide stopper. But the spring guide stopper goes into the slot of the cylinder right here, and that's why the spring guide itself cannot move backwards. So gets pulled back, which means that this part right here, the piston, also has to have to move back. Now here I have an M90 to show you guys how it actually works, because with an M150 I couldn't do that, but the piston basically goes back and then clicks into the trigger unit right here, into the pistons here. Now if I pull the trigger, the pistons here goes to the side and piston goes forward. Now I'm going to remove that spring to show it to you a little bit smoother. So piston goes back onto the spring guide, and right here it clicks into place onto the trigger unit. So that's how it looks now. That's how the rifle looks on the inside right now. So the cylinder's in the back, and those parts are compressed now with the spring. The entire tension is inside the piston. Okay, then the bolt goes forward. So the cylinder goes forward. The bolt handle goes down, just locks the system in place, and there happens the same. So cylinder goes forward, but those parts always stay in the same place. Goes forward, bolt handle goes down, and now it looks like this inside the cylinder. So when the trigger gets pulled, the piston can accelerate due to the spring pressure. It goes forward and compresses the air in this area, in the area of the cylinder. So piston goes forward, compresses the air, and all the air goes through the nozzle into the inner barrel and accelerates out the BB. So that's the very basic function, not the basic function, actually the complete function of the cylinder. Now that we know how it works, let's talk about the different components and what's important. So let's start right off with the cylinder. Usually the cylinders of most Airsoft Sniper rifles, pretty much all Airsoft Sniper rifles, are made from aluminium or some other cheap metal. Those are going to break after a while, since the material is just not strong enough to handle, stronger springs. So those need to be exchanged to either a stainless steel one or a steel cylinder. That's already done on the SSG, so the shaft of the cylinder is made from steel. You don't have to exchange anything on the SSG. It's going to last forever, basically. Then what I also see on most sniper rifles is that the cylinder is crimped in the back, which means that, if you pull a million times, the bolt handle will start to wiggle, and you're gonna rip out the bolt handle, off the shaft of the cylinder. So that's why the bolt base is pinned into the cylinder with those 3 spring pins right here. The cylinder is going to last forever, basically, no matter which springs you drop in there. I actually tried the hardest spring out on the market. It's a PDI SS5000. It's even a little bit harder than the M190 that I offer at NOVRITSCH.com, and also the spring, no problem whatsoever. Okay, then the next part is the nozzle. Those nozzles are usually made of aluminium or of brass or stainless steel. All the materials work pretty good. Most nozzles don't need to be exchanged on Airsoft Sniper rifles, especially the ones of brass are usually strong enough. Here on the SSG we used aluminium, and it's also hard anodized, which makes the surface a little bit harder, so also this nozzle is going to last. Things that are important on the nozzle is that it seals properly with the O-ring and the cylinder. I'm going to show you a compression test later on, or let me just show it to you right now. So we drop in the piston into the cylinder, then we screw the nozzle into the system. And now if I use the spring guide stopper, I close the nozzle with my finger. I use the spring guide stopper to accelerate the piston forward. You're going to see that I can't move it forward, and it's also not moving by time since it seals 100%. If I let go, then the piston can move forward. That's the way it should be. Again, on the SSG, you don't have to exchange the nozzle. It's going to last forever. Okay, let's unscrew the entire thing so I can show you what's inside, which is the piston, also a very important part. Just like all parts, there is no unnecessary parts on a spring-powered Airsoft Sniper rifle. Piston is made of different materials since it has to, fulfill different requirements. Here in the back, it's made of steel. Most pistons are made of either plastic or they're just made from complete aluminum, which is not the best thing. The plastic ones, they just wear on the back where the sear of the trigger engages, like this. There's a lot of force, so it's going to whir, and even though the piston can turn, it's going to whir all around, and at some point the rifle is going to shoot by itself and the piston cannot stay back anymore. The aluminium ones, they are also whirring not as fast, but what I don't like about the aluminiums is that the aluminium is touching the inside of the cylinder, and metal against metal, with this fast acceleration, it's going to whir. There you will have, this metal dust inside your cylinder, which is not the best thing. And then, as I say, the aluminum whirs is just not as strong as steel. So here it's a hybrid, hybrid of different materials. In the back it's steel, so it's not going to whir. Then we have a POM ring here in the middle. It's a glide ring, which makes sure that the steel of the base doesn't touch the steel of the cylinder. Then the shaft itself is made of aluminum, which makes the piston lightweight. That's also important. You don't want to have a piston that's made completely of steel, since it's hard to accelerate. Everything that's heavy is hard to accelerate, and we want to make the FPS as high as possible with the lowest springs, and therefore we need a lightweight piston. So that's why this piece is made of aluminum. The coating, there is no point to it, just because it looks good. So even if you have, a piston that's normal aluminum color, that's completely fine. And in front, we have a rubber seal cap. There are different designs. There's the O-rings, the O-ring designs, and then there's the seal cap designs. I did some tests, and the cap ones just gave a little bit more consistency when it comes to FPS, so that's why I was sticking with the cap design on the SSG. What's nice about the cap design is that when it impacts, there's actually rubber impacting on the cylinder head, which is better than metal impacting on the cylinder head. Makes it a little bit more quiet, and it's going to last for longer. There's less vibrations going on, so that's a plus. What's also important about the piston is that they add enough screw glue between the different threads. So in this case, it's made of very, many different parts, with a thread here between the shaft and the cylinder head, and then with a thread between the shaft and the cylinder base. If those are unscrewing inside the cylinder, the piston is going to separate and you won't be able to shoot your rifle anymore. Okay, again, piston of the SG24 can withstand, I don't even know. I know it can withstand the SS5000 from PDI, which creates, I think it was 4.5 joules or something like this. It might be able to handle stronger springs, which are not even on the market, but just so you know, it's not going to break. If you have an aluminum piston or plastic piston, the plastic piston you have to exchange if you go towards, around 2 joules. And if it's aluminum, it's also going to break at around 2.5 joules. It's just going to whir. Then the next part is the spring guide. Those are also usually made of plastic or aluminum. The problem with plastic is once you use heavy springs, like this one, that's an M150, the spring is trying to go in all kinds of direction when it gets compressed, and if it's a very strong spring, it's going to snap the spring guide into 2 pieces. What's also a problem sometimes is when it's an aluminum spring guide, it's not from one piece, and the manufacturers try to save costs right there, so they screw this part right here into the base, and then sometimes those threads snap because they're just too short or made of a too low quality material. So you should exchange your spring guide to either stainless steel one or a steel one. Now in this case, I used a stainless steel combination for the SSG. The back of the spring guide stopper is heat treated to increase the hardness, to make it even harder than the stainless steel. The reason why I did this is because the contact surface of a spring is not always perfectly flat, and if it's not hard enough, it's gonna whir. At some point, you're gonna have those dips inside the base, and that's why I made sure that it's heat treated. Then when they're screwed together, also you have to make sure that there's enough screw glue inside there so it's not going to unscrew, because once it's unscrewing, the spring guide gets too long and the piston cannot go all the way onto it anymore, which means that it cannot engage with the piston sear anymore. Another thing that's important, what you should take care of, is that the spring guide is just as long as the piston. I've seen some models where for some strange reason they made the spring guide too short, which means that inside the cylinder it looks kind of like this. And when you want to compress the spring guide goes in all kinds of weird directions, and it just makes for a very unsmooth bolt pull. So that's also something that you should take care of. What's also very important, what I see some manufacturers missing, is that the base of the piston and the base of the spring guide should fit perfectly into each other, and the base should be long enough. The reason for this is that when everything is assembled and the spring guide is on the trigger box, then the piston goes to the back, and usually manufacturers make the spring guide base until here, so where my finger ends. But then the problem is, once the piston clicks into place and then the piston goes forward, then sometimes there is a gap in between those two, which means that the piston can go up and down, has a little bit of play, and that's usually those really scratchy bolt pulls that all of us know from the cheap Chinese-made sniper rifles. So here on the SSG I made sure that it's a long base, that those parts are securing each other into place even when the rifle is cocked. So that's another thing that you should take care of. Okay, so much about internals of the cylinder, the base that compresses the air. Hope that's not too dry. I'm trying to just mention stuff that's important, stuff that I learned through the manufacturing process of the SSG-24 and also from upgrading a ton of rifles throughout the last 8 years. The next guides will be trigger box internals, 90 degree versus 45 degrees, then different inner barrels, what's important when it comes to inner barrels, then hop-up jammers, which are very, very important when it comes to accuracy, probably the most important factor. And then I'm also going to talk about externals, like nylon fiber versus glass fiber reinforced polymer and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, again, let me know in the comments what you want to see next, and then if you guys like it, I'm going to continue this series. Again, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys probably on the next guide.